Hi Guy, welcome back CBS Beyond the Gates spoilers. Reveal that Vernon once believed he understood Bill better than anyone it through warmth or loyalty, but through the hard clarity that comes from seeing too many hidden corners. To keep believing in myths. In Fairmont Crest, men like Bill know how to turn every meeting into a transaction, every thank you into a debt, and every forgiveness into a leash that can tighten without warning. Vernon had accepted that game for too long, to the point where he sometimes convinced himself his patience was wisdom and his silence was power. But the moment Bill rejected him so brutally shattered that entire self-made comfort. It wasn't simply a refusal, it was a calculated humiliation, as if everything Vernon had done, known, and kept buried meant nothing. As if he were merely a decorative shadow allowed to stand nearby until he became inconvenient. When the door closed behind him, it wasn't just when meeting a Framite was status collapsing, pride being ground down, and resentment beginning to boil, thick and hot like molten metal. Vernon walked away feeling he had been stripped of the right to exist in a story he believed he helped shape. In the days that followed, sleep stopped coming easily. Because every time he closed his eyes he saw Bill's cold stare. The casual way Bill dismissed him like a beggar who should have known his place. The half-smile of a man convinced he could never be touched. The rage that grew inside Vernon wasn't loud at first, it was the slow, humiliating burn of being reduced. Of realizing Bill expected him to keep protecting secrets while being treated as disposable. And that was where something snapped. If Bill could cut him off without a second thought, why should Vernon keep playing the loyal keeper of Bill's darkness? If Bill chose severance, Vernon would choose to turn that cut into a wound that never healed. Vernon understood one thing with painful precision: if he wanted to strike back at Bill, he couldn't do it like a reckless man. Bill had money, power, and people willing to sweep stains away before they ever started to smell. To bring Bill down, Vernon had to hit the one place Bill couldn't buy back with a checkable's image. Especially the mask of the responsible father, the respectable man who always lands on his feet. That mask was thinner than Bill believed. In long, sleepless nights, Vernon began reopening the locked cabinets of the past, where every drawer held something lethal if opened at the right time. He didn't need to invent anything, because the most dangerous weapon in Fairmont Crest is the truth with proof, with traces, with witnesses. With a chain that links to events Bill thought he had buried. And then to mass along with the recent bribery scandal rose like a clear, brutal lever capable of cracking the entire structure Bill had built out of private deals. Vernon didn't have to create a new sin for Bill. Bill had already committed it. He had simply believed he could close every door, silence every mouth, and turn every footprint into rumor. What Bill failed to anticipate was the day the man closest to him would become the hand holding the match. Vernon began with strategic silence. He didn't rush around spilling pain like a man begging for sympathy, because that would only make him look small. He turned hurt into discipline. Each day, he forced himself to see the situation as a long war, where emotion could exist only as fuel, never as the steering wheel. He quietly gathered more evidence, not through anything obvious, but through the patience of a man who knew one mistake would give Bill the chance to strike first. Vernon combed through old contacts, half-finished calls, people Bill had pushed aside and left bitter. He reached out to Bill's former rivals, not to grovel for help, but to give the information weight. To make sure that when the secret broke, it wouldn't sound like one spiteful accusation from a wounded enemy. He needed it to land like a wave driven by multiple currents, too large to be hidden, too loud to be dismissed. Vernon knew how this world works. People don't believe truth simply because it's true. They believe it because it's big enough to become impossible to ignore. And he needed impossible. He needed the kind of revelation that turns reputation into rubble within hours. Even as he built his case, Vernon wasn't immune to hesitation. There were moments when he saw Bill in public, wearing the practiced face of a devoted father. And a small part of Vernon wondered if he was going too far. But the memory of that brutal rejection always returned like a hand tightening around his throat, reminding him that Bill never hesitated to injure others to keep himself clean. Vernon wasn't pretending to be righteous. He wasn't writing a moral sermon. He was restoring balance the only way a man like him could. After being cornered and stripped of dignity, his revenge didn't come from noble ideals. It came from the survival instinct of someone shoved into the dark, where you either bite back or get crushed. Then Vernon chose the moment. A major public event, flooded with cameras, microphones, bright lights, and the hungry pulse of the press and arena where a single spark could become a wildfire. Vernon knew that if he wanted the truth to spread like flame, he needed wind. And the media was wind. He arrived without theatrics but also without fear. What he carried was a terrifying calm of a man who had already crossed the point of no return. When Vernon suddenly exposed Bill's shocking secret in front of the press, the room changed temperature. Smiles froze. Conversations stalled. Eyes sharpened. In minutes, Bill's name, now tied to bribery connected to Tomas, stopped being a whispered suspicion in private hallways and became a headline ready to detonate across every screen. Vernon didn't need to shout. He simply offered what Bill feared most, proof that couldn't be waved away. Details too specific to dismiss as misunderstanding. Links too tight to sever with a simple denial. Vernon watched the instant Bill realized he was standing inside a storm he could not control, and that instant gave Vernon a rush of triumph that quickly turned into something colder. Because he also understood what comes next. A wounded Bill is more dangerous than a confident one. The news spread almost immediately. And it didn't damage Bill in a way that could be cleaned up with a charming interview or a donation check. It cracked him. People began looking back at everything Bill had ever done through a different lens, hearing every past statement with a new suspicion, rereading every business decision as potential corruption. Bill panicked and tried to do what he always does: deny, threaten, distract. But Vernon had prepared for that too. The evidence came out in a way that couldn't be crushed by grabbing one piece. It was a chain, break one link and the rest still held, and in fact became easier to see. Bill lost credibility not because everyone suddenly adored Vernon, but because the public began to believe Bill had something to hide. And that alone was enough to weaken him. And the damage didn't stop at reputation. From the beginning, Vernon had aimed for the thing that would truly terrify Bill: custody. Money could replace a mansion, rebuild a career, buy new allies. But the right to stand as a father if threatened would tear Bill apart in a way he couldn't camouflage. Once a bribery scandal and allegations of betrayal exploded in the press, the court could not pretend it didn't notice. Pressure closed around Bill's custody situation like iron jaws. Questions began to bloom quiet at first, then loud enough to echo everywhere. Is a man tied to bribery and moral rot fit to be a father? Is the environment he provides safe, or merely expensive packaging for something poisonous? Bill could control many things, but he could not control the way public outrage pushes legal systems to reconsider. That scrutiny frightened him more than anything else, because losing custody would be a wound no amount of cash could truly cover. Inside the eye of that storm, Donnie and those closest to Bill were stunned in different ways. Some went numb, unable to accept that Bill could be tangled in something so dirty. Others felt the ground shift beneath them, forced to calculate whether standing by Bill would sink them too. Donnie's shock was not just about the scandal itself, it was about the collapse of certainty. She was driven into a choice that felt like it could rewrite her entire life. Defend Bill out of loyalty and habit, or face the truth with a kind of painful maturity she wasn't sure she could survive. She didn't need to speak for everyone to sense the fracture inside her. If she stood with Bill, she risked becoming the protector of a dark secret. If she turned away, she risked becoming the traitor in Bill's eyes, and Bill does not forgive betrayal. Donnie knew Bill well enough to understand that in his world, affection always comes with conditions. And those conditions can become weapons at any time. Her silence, her hesitation, the subtle way she stopped moving automatically to shield him, those were dangerous signals. Bill wasn't only losing public favor. He was beginning to lose the people who had once formed his closest wall of protection. Meanwhile, Vernon's victory turned into something double-edged. He felt a savage satisfaction in watching Bill bleed, in forcing Bill to finally look up at the damage he had done to others. But at the same time, fear crept in like a shadow. Vernon had lit a match, and now he could feel the wind changing direction. Bill might be cornered by the press and threatened by the court, but he was still Bill, a man who cannot tolerate humiliation without returning it tenfold. Vernon began noticing small warning skulls that went silent when he answered. Familiar faces suddenly avoiding him, the sensation of eyes lingering too long. The feeling of being hunted slid into his days. He had wanted Bill to suffer, but he also understood a wounded predator bites blindly, and the closest target is always the first to bleed. Bill vowed to destroy Vernon, and he didn't need to say it aloud for everyone to feel it. It was there in the way Bill began to compress his reactions, to become quieter, sharper, more calculated, like a man willing to absorb a blow if it buys him time to plan a precise, devastating counterstrike. Bill might look shaken in court, rattled under the glare of headlines. But with Vernon he would never behave like a victim. He would behave like a man determined to turn Vernon into a warning for anyone tempted to betray him. That made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Because this conflict was no longer about right or wrong. It was about who collapses first, who loses more, who survives after everything burns. Vernon believed he was justified because he had been humiliated and discarded. Bill believed he was justified because Vernon had endangered his family, his custody, and his position. Neither man would see himself as the villain, and that is exactly why the war was only beginning. In the days that followed, tension became a daily pulse. Bill was attacked by questions, by suspicious glances, by the cautious distance of people who used to shake his hand too eagerly. Every step he took felt like a world waiting for him to stumble. Inside him, anger toward Vernon sharpened into something lethal, while fear of losing custody turned his blood cold. And fear can make a man dangerous. Bill might act composed for cameras, but in private the anxiety would eat him alive, pushing him toward choices that bordered on extreme. The more extreme Bill became, the harder he would be to predict, and unpredictability in Fairmont Crest is always a threat. He began to see everyone through suspicion: who was still loyal, who was wavering, who could sell him out to save themselves. That suspicion weakened already fragile bonds, especially with Donnie, who now stood at the center of a crisis she never asked for. Vernon, too, no longer looked like a man celebrating. He understood the cost of what he had done. He couldn't pull the truth back now. The secret belonged to the public, and the public never returns what it takes. Vernon could not return to being silent because after exposing Bill, he would always be the man who dared, and in Bill's eyes, the man who dared must be punished. Vernon started to realize he had placed a mark on himself as surely as he had placed a stain on Bill. There was no safe ground left, only strategy, timing, and the hope of staying one step ahead of a man who never forgets a wound. The tension thickened so much that every message, every event, every unexpected meeting felt like a match hovering above gasoline. People began whispering about what the court might do next, whether Bill would lose custody, where Donnie would stand, how violently Bill might strike back at Vernon. The story refused to end because Bill has never accepted endings written by anyone else. And strangely, what frightened everyone most was Bill's unusual quiet after the initial explosion. The less he reacted, the more it seemed he was gathering venom for one final bite. The calmer Vernon tried to appear, the more it looked like a man listening for a hunter's footsteps. The more Donnie stayed silent, the more it felt like she was standing on the edge of a decision that would break her either way. And just as public outrage continued to swell, just as the court began weighing Bill's fitness as a father, and Bill fought desperately to keep the ground beneath him, an unsettling signal slipped into the narrative like a fresh blade. A particular piece of evidence, connected to the bribery involving Tomas, surfaced in a way that made everyone freeze. Because it didn't only pin Bill further, it raised the most dangerous question of all. What if someone knew this secret long before Vernon ever spoke? What if this scandal was not the final blow, but only the opening shot of something far darker waiting to be revealed? And in that moment, Bill's focus shifted away from cameras, away from the courtroom, away from public damage control, and locked onto the one person he suddenly believed was the weakest link in the entire chain, the easiest point to crush to make everything else collapse. And the name on Bill's mind turned the air to ice, like the warning of a bigger storm about to break. Donnie stepped into that morning with a feeling that was equal parts exhilaration and unease, as if she were standing on the edge of something that could permanently reshape the way people saw her. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary workday: tight schedules, back-to-back calls, non-stop messages about shifting alliances and fresh rumors. But inside Donnie, the air felt stretched thin, tense enough that one small detail could knock everything off course. She understood what everyone in this world understands: a reputation isn't only what people witness, it's what they repeat. And in a moment when any story in Genoa City or Fairmont Crest can be hijacked by a single leaked photo or an out-of-context text, Donnie couldn't afford to appear like someone desperate for attention, for opportunity, for a lifeline. She had to look like the one making choices, the one building something, the one pulling the spotlight toward herself. Her modeling company needed momentum, needed a face with real pull, something raw enough, believable enough, lived in enough to stand in front of a lens and not get swallowed whole. And the name that rose in her mind, simple and dangerous at the same time, was Isaiah. Donnie had spotted Isaiah from a distance the way she always spotted possibility, before others caught on. There was something in him that made people believe he could stand steady in the strongest winds, while keeping his composure. That same quality was precisely why Donnie refused to approach him with soft flattery or easy promises. She knew a man like Isaiah could smell fake from a mile away. She also knew he wasn't the type to be blinded by the glitter the modeling world uses to lure people in. He had his job, his rhythm, and the kind of self-respect that doesn't need applause to feel real. And that was what made Donnie both drawn to him and challenged by him. She didn't only want Isaiah because he fit the business. She wanted to prove she could persuade a man who wasn't easily persuaded. She wanted his yes to become a stamp of approval, proof that Donnie still had the magnetism, the leverage, the authority to pull someone into her orbit without looking like she needed him more than he needed her. Yet even as the plan formed, a cold current ran down her spine. Donnie recognized how fragile the line was between ambition and personal hunger. She questioned whether she needed a model or whether she needed the feeling of being seen, respected, chosen. She questioned whether the look she kept returning to Isaiah with was the look of a businesswoman, evaluating a valuable asset, or the look of a woman craving a clean beginning. And the more she questioned it, the more she understood that when she spoke to him, she had to do it with absolute control. One wrong note in her voice, one hint of impatience, 1 second of revealing too much could turn her offer into a plea. Donnie hated the idea of pleading more than she feared rejection itself. So when she prepared to approach Isaiah, she wore her control like armor. She arranged the moment the way she would arrange a launch, timing, setting, posture. The smooth path into the conversation that would leave him room to react without feeling cornered. People like to pretend an invitation to join a company is purely business, but in Donnie's world, every invitation is also a quiet declaration of power. Who needs whom? Donnie wanted to keep her hands on the wheel. And still, beneath that surface, a part of her trembled, not because she feared he would say no, but because she feared he might say yes and make everything too real. Because the moment Isaiah stepped into her world, even under the label of work, the rumor machine would ignite. People would connect dots, sharpen their assumptions, feed their nastiest interpretations. Donnie, who looked fearless to everyone else, was most afraid of losing control of her own narrative. That was why Isaiah's reaction became the hinge not only for her company's next move, but for Donnie's sense of safety in the days ahead. If he was cold, she would have to swallow disappointment and still look untouched. If he was uncertain, she would have to read whether it was surprise or reluctance. If he genuinely considered it, she would have to keep herself from slipping into the most dangerous emotion of all, hope. Because hope makes people reckless faster than anger ever could. While Donnie moved toward that pivotal moment, Eva walked into a different kind of storm she understood better than anyone, and not by choice. A new door might open for Donnie, and she didn't yet know whether it led to light or darkness. But Eva was standing in front of an old door that had rotted for years. And she already knew what waited on the other side: manipulation, uncontrolled fury, impulsive decisions that could destroy someone else just to satisfy a fleeting rush. Ava's reunion with Leslie wasn't casual. It came with that familiar pressure in the chest, that sense of bracing for impact. Leslie arrived in a mood so vicious it didn't need words: the tight jaw, the sharpened stare, the kind of breathing that sounded like she was swallowing fire. To outsiders, she might have looked like a woman irritated by something petty. Eva knew better. Eva knew that when Leslie went quiet like that, she was writing revenge in her head. What made Ava's blood run colder was that she didn't need an explanation to guess the source of Leslie's rage. It was sitting in the background like a poison that refused to fade: the closeness between Shanice and Ted Richardson. That wasn't just a relationship that annoyed Leslie, it was a symbol of everything she couldn't control. It reminded her that some people can enter someone's life through sincerity, while she enters through force. It reminded her there were bonds she couldn't manipulate. And for Leslie, what can't be controlled becomes something she wants to break. Eva had seen it too many times. Leslie couldn't tolerate being outside the story. She couldn't tolerate other people being happy without needing her. And the most terrifying part was that Leslie always knew how to convert resentment into action. As if she believed she had the right to correct the world when it didn't obey her. A bad feeling clenched in Ava's stomach, specific, almost metallic. It wasn't vague anxiety. It was instinct. Because Eva understood her mother the way survivors understand danger. By reading the smallest signals. Over the years, she had learned to tell the difference between Leslie being merely irritated and Leslie being locked onto a target. She could see when Leslie would cool off and when Leslie was about to pull something this time. Every sign pointed toward the same conclusion. Leslie was preparing to do something cruel. Eva didn't allow herself to lose control because with Leslie, emotion is always an opening to exploit. If Eva looked frightened, Leslie would feel powerful. If Eva looked angry, Leslie would weaponize it and claim Eva didn't understand her, wasn't loyal to her, was siding with everyone else. Eva had to keep her voice and face inside a narrow safe zone, watching, intervening, managing distance without igniting Leslie's temper. It was a survival skill Eva never wanted, yet had mastered in a way that felt tragic. And then the most concrete fear surfaced, one that made Ava's breath shallow and fast. The desperate hope that Leslie would not climb onto a motorcycle again and do something reckless. Something violent, like trying to ram that nurse. The thought alone tightened Ava's throat because it wasn't a random nightmare. It was a possibility grounded in Leslie's history. In the way she could treat other people's safety like a footnote to her own rage. Eva knew that Leslie could justify almost anything if she believed she was reclaiming justice. And Leslie's version of justice was always warped into something dangerous. As Eva strained to keep Leslie within reach of her own vigilance, Donnie edged closer to her own turning point. She made her offer to Isaiah with professional polish wrapped tightly around private expectation. Donnie wanted him at her modeling company because she needed what he could bring to the brand, but also because she needed to prove she could still build something new, still stand on her own without borrowing power from old ties. Yet she couldn't ignore the reality that Isaiah might not respond the way she imagined. If he reacted cautiously, Donnie would face the question of how hard she could push without looking like she was trying too hard. If he reacted bluntly, she would have to swallow the sting to her pride and still carry herself like the one in control. If he offered a half yes, a delayed answer, Donnie would have to endure the worst kind of suspensive kind that leaves you hanging. The kind that can drive you mad faster than rejection ever could. What made it sharper was that Donnie, like Eva, carried a faint premonition, and Donnie didn't recognize it immediately. Something around her felt subtly shifted, as if this invitation wasn't just an invitation. In this world, people who appear at the perfect moment rarely appear by accident. And when Donnie considered that Isaiah was close to Eva Thomas, a shadow crossed her thoughts: Leslie. Donnie didn't need details to understand what a woman like Leslie could do. Leslie could turn other people's lives into her stage. Donnie didn't want to be dragged into that kind of chaos. She wanted her company to grow, to stand on its own, to force everyone who underestimated her to look again. But the truth was brutal. She couldn't choose the environment where her ambition unfolded. On Ava's side, the sense of incoming trouble deepened as she realized Leslie wasn't simply in a bad mood. Leslie looked like she was winding herself up for an explosion. The tension around Shanice and Ted Richardson was lodged in her like a splinter. She refused to remove. Eva saw it like an addiction. Leslie couldn't stop circling the same grievance. Couldn't stop feeding it until it grew sharp enough to cut someone. Eva wanted to believe it would be different this time, that Leslie would rant and then let it go. But the fact that Eva wanted to believe that made her more afraid. Because she had wanted to believe it before and she had lived through the consequences. As the day slid toward afternoon, the air grew heavier. Donnie waited for Isaiah's reaction like she was waiting on a verdict. But she still had to wear the right smile. Eva tracked Leslie's movements like she was tracking a fuse. Leslie carried a low, burning anger fueled by feeling threatened by Shanice's closeness to Ted Richardson. And the more threatened she felt, the more unpredictable she became. Together, these threats formed a suffocating certainty that something was about to happen. Not something small. Not something that could be repaired with a quick apology. Something big enough to leave a scar. And then, just when it seemed the tension might remain trapped in private worry, a small but razor-edged sign appeared, a moment that made Eva feel her heart drop. Leslie did something familiar. An old habit that only surfaced when she was about to act on an impulse. Eva recognized it instantly with the reflex of someone raised inside storms her own mother created. At the same time, Donnie sensed the atmosphere around Isaiah shift, as if his reaction wasn't only an answer about joining the company, but the first signal in a chain of consequences. And as those two currents moved closer to colliding, the only thought pounding inside Eva was a silent plea that this time, Leslie would not choose a motorcycle as her weapon of resolution. Because if Leslie's mind had turned in that direction again, the first person dragged into disaster might not be only that nurse. It could be Donnie, Isaiah, and everything they had just begun to build, until the instant Eva turned her head and saw what made her blood run cold. One detail sharp enough to prove the next episode wouldn't be about rumors anymore, but about an impact no one would be able to avoid. The Beyond the Gates CBS Spoilers channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the series from the perspective of a longtime fan. This allows viewers to gain deeper, more objective, and interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the series.